Here in London, there's a thing called the ultra low emission zone, which is about to expand in October. It basically means if you have a more polluting car, you have to pay £12.50 a day to drive inside the M25. It is ridiculous. And the people it affects most are people without very much money. If you're rich and you can pay the £12.50, pollute as much as you want. If you're not rich, sucks to be you. So to counter that, in this video I'll talk to you about 10 cars that all cost less than £1,000 that are all ULEZ compliant and perfect for city people like myself. Hit like if you like this video, subscribe if you're new. Without further ado, let's get straight into it. We're kicking this video off with my own personal car, the VW Polo 9N or 4th generation Polo, which comes with a 1.2 litre inline 3 engine producing 54 brake horsepower and managing 0 to 60 in a quoted 16.9 seconds, though I've proven it can actually be slower than that. You'll easily get one under £1,000, and in fact I got mine for £400 a few years ago, which was lucky, particularly because it's ULEZ compliant. It is getting on a bit in age now, same as all the cars on this list, but what you can expect for our price range, and genuinely despite its age, as an owner I can attest it's a perfect little city car. Slow to 60, yes, but quick to 30, and in London in particular that's more than enough, with nimble predictable handling dynamics being perfect for city driving. If possible, aim for an S model or beyond and get a few more modern creature comforts like electric windows and the likes. You'll also be able to find a few facelift 9N3 examples at the 1K Mark II, so choose whether you prefer the old circular lights or the newer, more typical ones, but either way, coil packs are known to fail and there are many more less disruptive build quality issues to be aware of. Next up we have basically my former car, the Skoda Fabia. I had the estate version, but the hatchback would probably be the better city car, with its 1.2 litre inline 3 engine making 64 brake horsepower and doing 0 to 60 in 15.4 seconds, though again mine was definitely slower than that. Like the Polo, I got my estate for £400. These are pretty readily available for under £1,000 from around 2004. The story is very similar to the Polo, as Skoda is effectively the more budget brand from VW, at least when the car was released back in the early 2000s. It shares the same engine, the same platform and many similar parts. Switching from my Skoda to the Polo, I felt right at home immediately. That does also mean the same basic reliability record though, with coil pack issues and the likes. In fact, the most annoying issue I came across was the central locking failing, with passengers having to clamber over the driver's seat to get in and out. All in though, it's a solid car, completely basic in terms of what it offers, but perfect as a day-to-day runabout that's ULEZ compliant. Moving on, we have another car that I drove a long time ago, the Peugeot 206, a very typical first car for my generation, which remains a reasonable little city car today. It comes with a little 1.1 litre inline 4 engine which produces 60 brake horsepower, taking it to 60 in 14.7 seconds, and there are plenty available for under £1,000, even with the larger and faster 1.6 litre engine. Considering this car was an absolute hero in rallying, taking 3 manufacturers championships and 2 drivers championships, as a daily driver it's pretty sedate, but does the job perfectly. I would say the interior isn't quite as nice as the VW Group offerings, but aesthetically it's probably a better looking car on the exterior, having won the Most Beautiful Car of the Year award in 1998, which is pretty mental to think about. This success was a major positive for Peugeot, as the brand was losing market share massively in the super mini class to VW and Ford after they phased out the 205. The 206 was effectively a late replacement for the 205 and helped keep them in this super mini class today. There are some well-known issues to be aware of as well, with the rear suspension, batteries and fuel pumps. Like many of the cars on this list, some of my friends at school had Renault Clios. In fact, one of my best friends had one, so I have very fond memories cruising around in one, which makes it even better that it remains a ULEZ compliant city car for under £1,000. It comes with a 1.2 litre inline 4 engine which makes 60 brake horsepower, taking it to 60 in 14.5 seconds, so very similar to the Peugeot. This second generation Clio came out in 1998, but had literally 6 phases globally, with 4 or 5 of them making it to the UK depending on how much of a change you consider each facelift to be. The original Clio picked up where the iconic Renault 5 left off, as a super mini with great agility, economy and insurance prices for younger drivers. Despite it being at the cheaper end of Renault's offering, it was given a lot of love during the design process, hence the faster versions like the Renault Sport do actually look quite nice, and it also came as a test bed for special projects like the electric Clio all the way back in 1998. The suspension is known to be a bit weak on these, and some brake problems are known as well, and a bunch of build quality complaints too. Next up we have one of the 2 newer cars on the list, the FIAT Grande Punto, which you can get a 2007 model in for under £1,000 if you're lucky. That'll mean you'll get a 1.2 litre inline 4 engine producing 65 brake horsepower and managing 0 to 60 in 14 seconds. This is the 3rd generation Punto, which went on sale from 2005 and was designed by world-renowned designer Giugiaro, which is pretty special. I genuinely think it's a really nice looking generation of the Punto off the back of this. The good thing about this is that it's not just an update of the previous generation. A lot of parts on it were very new, although this didn't actually do much to help the Punto's reliability, as it's known to have many build quality issues, particularly on the interior, which has probably helped it to be so cheap today. Irrespective though, it is slightly larger than some of the other cars on this list, which means that it can be a bit more practical, so if you can deal with the sketchy build, it could be relatively useful. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you are, do let me know in the comments what your opinions are on the ultra low emission zone, particularly the expansion happening in October, which takes it from effectively like central plus a bit of London to literally almost everywhere in the M25. I've made a video in the past about it, you can hear my opinions elsewhere, and do hit like and subscribe for 2 videos every single week. Moving on now to Toyota Yaris, a staple little car with a generally good reliability record that comes with a 1 litre inline 4 producing 67 brake horsepower, taking it from 0 to 60 in 13.6 seconds. It's crazy to think that this car paved the way for the GR Yaris we see today, as they couldn't be more different outside of the badge, but then you can get these for more than 30 times less than a GR Yaris from around 2002. And it's not like it's a bad car. It won Car of the Year Japan in 1999 and European Car of the Year in 2000, and Toyota treated it as the fun project during the design and creation process. Its original name in Japan is the Vitz, but in the UK and Europe it's the Yaris because Vitz is too close to the German for wit, or a loose translation of joke. The only thing I'd say is that it doesn't quite have the same allure as the Starlet that it replaced, which has become a bit of an enthusiast car. Plus, though reliability is generally good, transmissions and clutches have caused problems more commonly than you'd hope. The Ford Fiesta is another car I drove a few years ago, as my dad had one as the perfect little runaround, with a 1.25 litre inline 4 engine which makes 73 brake horsepower, taking it to 60 in 13.6 seconds. Considering the Fiesta badge has now been canned, with hotter versions starting to rise in price, it's cool to see you can still get cheap Fiestas for under £1,000 from around 2003. Ignoring the stats for a moment, this car's engine does feel quite strong, not objectively but against its peers. When I drove one, it felt like it held its own on the motorway better than my Polo ever does, for example. I think the interiors aren't quite as nice as VW ones, but that's a matter of opinion. Comparatively, the exterior is pretty nice, especially in the right spec. If you go for a Zetec S, for example, you get some nice extra flary bits on the body kit, which is always nice. Noisy gearboxes and tapping engines are two problems noted by owners on these when they've done a few miles, and inconsistent idling and coolant leaks are also known issues. Somehow the Corsa has garnered itself a bad reputation online because of the types of owners it gets, but genuinely I've always been pleasantly surprised by them, and the Corsa C definitely isn't a bad cheap city runaround, with its 1.2 litre inline 4 engine producing 78 brake horsepower, which would get it to 60 in 11.8 seconds, not terrible for an engine that small. When you add on the fact that it's readily available for under £1,000, it becomes a super cheap route into ULEZ compliance. It's not the most beautiful Corsa in the world, but it's not horrendous, particularly the post 2003 facelift models, which make them look a little bit less bubbly. In the UK, it was an absolutely massive sales success, being the second most popular car overall in 2002, 3 and 4, as well as the most popular Super Mini in all of those years plus 2005, which helps to be so cheap today considering we bought so many. If you ignore the problems around the rattling gearbox, the terrible build quality and the cheap parts used across the car to keep prices low and make it popular, having driven one, it's not a bad car at all compared to some other sub £1,000 competitors. A nicer car on this list for under £1,000 is definitely the Mini 1. It's put together reasonably well, it's comfortable to drive, the interior is a bit more premium than some of the other cars on this list, and it's a great contender in the city car class. It comes with a 1.6 litre inline 4 engine producing 90 brake horsepower and managing 0 to 60 in 10.6 seconds, which is perfectly serviceable. When it came out, I wasn't a fan. Even as a kid, I was a Mini purist, but once I had the chance to actually experience one, I had a lot more time for it, and in one spec, though basic, it does offer everything you need as a cheap city runaround. I would just say that the boot is quite small, as are the rear seats, and if you're someone who likes 5 doors over 3, it didn't come with them. It did, however, come in convertible, so if that floats your boat, it's an opportunity to own a cheap city runaround that you can also feel the wind in your hair in. Electrical issues, failed central locking and transmission issues are quite common on these, however. Matching the Mini pretty much exactly on pace is the Suzuki Swift, with its 1.3 litre inline 4 engine producing 90 brake horsepower with a 0 to 60 time of 10.6 seconds, which is another car that some of my school friends had as their first back when I just got into driving, but remains a solid city car today for under £1,000, though it can be slightly more difficult to find in this price range. Suzuki didn't actually want this car to be a cheap Super Mini. It was supposed to be a sporty Super Mini with a lower price than its competitors. Now, I wouldn't say it's sporty by any means, but having reviewed one on the channel a few years ago, I definitely rate it as a little runaround, plenty practical, has actually got really good pace considering, feels quality inside, and genuinely a perfect little car for the money. I literally own a car on this list, so I should be biased, but I think objectively all in the Swift is a better car than the Polo if you're paying the same price for it. Clutches and gearboxes offer the main problems on these, probably in part because new drivers have abused them. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, do hit like and subscribe as well if you're new, I'd really appreciate it. Massive thanks for watching it, thanks to the patrons as well for their support, and if you want to watch another video on some cheap luxury cars, then click up here and subscribe down here.